Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, the third part thereof for the 30th of December 2024. This is a geopolitics video. A fair bit still going on, even though we're in a period of, I guess, holidays for some in the world, Christmas and New Year, and you'd expect there not to be an awful lot going on, perhaps, but war doesn't stop for Christmas. War doesn't stop for New Year's celebrations. So there is the world concerned with the war still being very active. Now, one of the active elements of this war is a hybrid warfare that Russia is waging on much of the world, certainly the allies of Ukraine. OSINT Defender here reports that following several incidents recently of Russian and Chinese linked ships damaging submarine cables in the Baltic Sea, the Prime Minister of Latvia, Evika Silina, has stated that they may soon begin seizing ships of the Russian Shadow Fleet in order to defend critical infrastructure. This is something that I've been calling for, or at least, robust responses whereby Russia is put on the back foot. We need to punish Russia for doing these egregious things. And pussyfooting around isn't good enough. I think we just need to be really strong, because I don't think Putin is used to really strong responses to him. He's used to getting his own way and people backing away from him. We need to stand up strong and say, no, you've been absolutely ridiculous over here and we're going to punish you for that. And what are you going to do about it? No, nothing. Okay, so shut up and sit down. And moving on, but staying in that same domain, the Swedish Social Democrats want the government to push for NATO's Article 4 to be activated, given the situation in the Baltic Sea. Okay, so given this hybrid warfare that Russia is waging on Europe, on allies of Ukraine, Article 4 should be triggered. What is Article 4? Well, the North Atlantic Treaty here says the parties to this treaty reaffirm their faith in the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and their desire to live in peace with all peoples and all governments. They're determined to safeguard the freedom, common heritage and civilization of their peoples, founded on the principles of democracy, individual liberty and the rule of law. They seek to promote stability and well-being in the North Atlantic area. They are resolved to unite their efforts for collective defence and for the preservation of peace and security, and they therefore agree to this North Atlantic Treaty. And we're going to go to Article 4, but it might be worth just going through 1, 2, 3, 4, and then obviously the famous Article 5. So Article 1 is the parties undertake to set forth in the Charter of the United Nations to settle any international dispute in which they may be involved by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered, and to refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force in any manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. Article 2, the parties will contribute toward the further development of peaceful and friendly international relations by strengthening their free institutions, by bringing about a better understanding of the principles upon which these institutions are founded, and by promoting conditions of stability and well-being. They will seek to eliminate conflict in their international economic policies and will encourage economic collaboration between any or all of them. Interesting. So actually Article 2 is talking about NATO members having economic cooperation and promoting well-being amongst themselves. Article 3, in order more effectively to achieve the objectives of this treaty, the parties separately and jointly by means of continuous and effective self-help and mutual aid will maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. So Article 3 is your kind of 2% of GDP, 2.5% of GDP, 3%. It's like trying to quantify Article 3. We will develop our individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. Article 4 is what the Swedish Democrats are talking about, and actually other people have been talking about over the last month or so. The parties will consult together whenever, in the opinion of any of them, the territorial integrity, political independence, or security of any of the parties is threatened. So Article 4 is your precursor to Article 5. So we need to get together and talk about whether, things have happened that should trigger Article 5. So I think absolutely Article 4 should have been triggered by now. I think it's obvious that Russia has in the opinion of any, the territory threatens. So sorry, passive and active voice here. So I think absolutely Russia has threatened the security of the parties, threatened the security in their cyber warfare, in their hacking, in their attacks on cable and communication infrastructure, in setting fire or putting incendiary devices in DHL warehouses and on DHL planes. You know, this is Article 4 stuff. We need to get together and see whether this is serious enough to trigger Article 5. There isn't some machine somewhere that just triggers, like, ding, 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 that's happened because we've got some kind of AI sense of what's going on around the world, and we've compiled all the news media, and this has now triggered Article 5. No, we need to get together and talk about that, and that's the Article 4. And obviously Article 5, then the parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all, and consequently they agree that if such an attack occurs, each of them, in exercise of the right of individual or collective self-defense recognised by Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations, will assist the party or parties so attacked by taking forthwith individually and in concert with the other party such action as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area. It's interesting how much of this is very geographically constrained, and I wonder whether with the Indo-Pacific now being such an important part of the world, whether NATO will even change its name. I don't know. Any such armed attack, it finishes in Article 5, and all measures taken as a result thereof shall immediately be reported to the Security Council. As such measures shall be terminated when the Security Council has taken the measures necessary to restore and maintain international peace and security. So Article 4, yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that should be triggered. Right, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico sent a letter to EU leaders criticising Zelensky's decision to end the Russian gas transit after 2024, calling it irrational and warning of tensions and retaliation. But the retaliation that's been threatened by Robert Fico, which is we won't sell back energy to you when you are in need, Ukraine. So given your energy infrastructure has been hammered, there will be times when we sell you back energy because you cannot produce enough yourself. So if you're not going to allow gas to transit through your country from Russia to us, then we won't provide you with electricity. But Poland has now come out and said they are ready to help Ukraine if Slovakia cuts off electricity. According to Bloomberg, the Polish government is ready to increase domestic electricity production to compensate for any imbalance that would arise in the Ukrainian system if Slovakia takes action, which is a kind of like two fingers up to Slovakia. Screw you, Slovakia. We're going to help Ukraine and actually possibly make money out of doing that. So sending energy back to Ukraine is something that Slovakia are saying they're not going to be able to do, thinking, well, we'll take the financial hit because we need the financial gain of getting transit. So if you're going to do that, then we're going to stop giving you electricity. But actually, that's going to hurt the Slovakian economy because they'll be selling that electricity back. And now Poland, so we'll step up. Thank you very much. And essentially, that's a lose really for Slovakia because they don't get their gas transit. They don't get the gas from Russia, and they don't sell their electricity to Ukraine. Ouch. Right, Poland will close, talking about Poland, will close its border with Belarus with a 418-kilometre wall by the summer of 2025, according to Poland's Deputy Minister of Migration, Maciej Duszczyk, or something, according to Financial Times. Night vision cameras and thermal imaging cameras are also being installed on the border with Belarus, and a new road is being built to patrol the border area. In fact, there's a road being built, I haven't included this, but I should do, a road has been... I don't know if it's been given the green light or whether they're talking about this, but they're going to build a road in Poland to Kaliningrad, the exclave on the Baltic Sea. They're going to build a road to Kaliningrad, a major kind of highway road for military purposes, in order that if they need to get a lot of military equipment to Kaliningrad in the event of a war with Russia, then they have that. And this is something that NATO have been talking about over the course of the war, which is how prepared are NATO, is Europe, if it comes to a war. What are the abilities of huge amounts of military equipment to be transported from, say, France, the UK, through Europe to Eastern Europe? Are the railways able to take these very heavy loads? Are the roads able to take these very heavy loads? So actually, part of planning for war isn't just about, like, do we have enough tanks? Do we have enough airplanes? Do we have enough artillery shells? It's like, can the roads take, what's the infrastructure we have for moving equipment? And in the event of a war, is NATO prepared in that manner? And so that's really important, and Poland possibly doing something about that in a very localized way there. Now, Georgia, protests are still going on in Tbilisi streets. Every passing car honks for protesters in the presidential palace. The lights are now dark. Georgia's crisis enters a new phase, says the Euromaidan press. Marika Mikiashvili, I'd love to speak to her, believes the regime can fall, but Georgia's friends must continue its delegitimization, written in the Euromaidan press. Now, the point here for me is that the West needs to be really strong in supporting Georgia. This is an inflection point for Georgia, but also for that whole region. Armenia's direction of travel depends on what happens in Georgia, being landlocked between them and Azerbaijan. Really important that we support Georgia and help them shake off the shackles of the Kremlin, and that will send a really clear message to the Kremlin. Now, going to Germany, I just wanted a bit of a rundown on the German political situation. Now, bearing in mind, this is just one person's views on what's going on in Germany, just a random commenter on my thread. This is a chap called Echo. I presume it's a chap. Pinch of salt, but I'm going to read through because I think it is an interesting comment. Thank you very much for the time spent putting this together. Hello, Jonathan. Some time ago, you asked for feedback regarding the political situation in Germany regarding the upcoming elections. Here's my assessment based on the data from the latest surveys. The coming Bundestag, the German parliament, is expected to consist of at least 4, perhaps even 7 parties. This will depend on whether smaller parties such as the FDP, who've just been in coalition with, in the traffic light coalition, and they opted out, and which is why we have got this, declaration of lack of confidence in the government and why it's been dissolved. So it's whether these, like the FDP as a smaller coalition member, or the BSW, that is Sarah Wagenknecht, who used to be in the Linke, which is also another party mentioned here. They are very pro-Russia, BSW, anti-Ukraine, the Linke as well to some degree. So if these don't get 5%, then they don't get parliamentarians. So it depends whether these smaller parties get over the 5% hurdle or achieve enough direct mandates. I don't want to go into the electoral system because it would get out of hand. Current surveys see the CDU, so it's a Christian Democratic Union, Friedrich Merz, that I've already talked about, 31%. Actually, I talked about it in the last video. 31%. So ahead of the AfD. The scary thing is the AfD is a far-right party who are seen by some as terrorists or terrorist affiliated, etc., etc. They are getting 19.5% and in second place, ahead of Olaf Scholz's SPD, the centre-left party, who are on 16%, the Green Party on 12.5%, and the smaller parties, BSW, 8%. So that's fairly significant for BSW, who have come along from kind of nowhere. FDP, 5%, and Die Linke, 3%. Okay. There are other polls that see all the small parties below 5%, so it could be that FDP and the BSW don't reach the 5%. None of the bigger parties will form a coalition with the AfD. I also don't believe the SPD or the Green Party, together with the CDU, will form a coalition with the FDP. So that's known as the Grosser coalition, I think, the big coalition. So if you, the Grosser coalition is the SPD with the CDU. So it's almost like centre-right, centre-left, who are normally against each other, actually form a coalition together. But before that, you might get those two and the Greens. So like a coalition of all the main parties, really. He says, I don't think you'll see that. So I don't believe the SPD or the Green, together with the CDU, will form a coalition with the FDP if it enters the Bundestag, because the FDP, so that's a smaller party that was in coalition, in traffic light coalition, is largely responsible for the breakup of the current coalition. Yep, so they're seen as unreliable. Okay, that's the AMPL, the traffic lights coalition. Okay, CDU, as the strongest party, will nominate the Chancellor. That will probably be Friedrich Merz. Merz, a former BlackRock employee, is a bit like Mr. Burns of the German politics. Not very popular, socially cold, tough on migration policy, very strong on migration, backwards on transport and energy policy, rather catastrophe in terms of domestic policy. But he is an avowed European and a supporter of Ukraine. He could also improve relations with France and especially Poland. Scholz's biggest failure and mistake was to cool those relations. The outcome of the election will perhaps be enough for a coalition between the CDU and the SPD, first case, so that's the Grosser coalition, or for a coalition between the CDU and the Green. That's his second scenario. In the first case, social hardship is cushioned. So the centre-right and centre-left, the centre-left will temper the centre-right's attack on the welfare state. But a coalition of the CDU and SPD, so-called Grosse Coalition, also represents years of political stalemate in the Merkel era. However, neither Germany nor Europe can afford a continued phase of political stagnation because this will cause the AfD to become even stronger. Scholz will almost certainly resign from the SPD chairmanship after the election. His entourage, Plötner, Metternich, Stegner, etc., are all very fond of Russia, may have less influence in the SPD after the election. Pistorius will probably take over the leadership, so he's your popular defense minister at the moment. He will probably take leadership of the SPD after the election, and there's a support of Ukraine and a higher defence spending. In the second case, a coalition between CDU and Greens, they will be less focused on social policy and more on environmental policy. The different views on migration policy and transport policy could be a cause of tensions here, but the Greens also support a tough stance towards Russia and more help for Ukraine. So the Greens very in support of Russia. The foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, is from the Green Party. She's excellent on Ukraine. Coalitions between CDU and Greens have already been very successful at state level, so that's happened in the past. In summary, I would assume that the election means more support for Ukraine. Politicians, especially in the SPD, who adhere to an outdated image of Russia and a glorification of Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik, will lose massive amounts of influence. The AfD, although strong, will have no influence on the government. Following the election, the AfD will even face a ban. A coalition between AfD and CDU at the federal level is unthinkable because of the differences in European politics. Fascinating. If that's true, it seems like a really reasonable synthesis of all the information and a good prediction of what will go on. And hopefully that helps you guys out as well. This is all about us learning how European politics works in the context of Ukraine. And it's probably going to be good news for Ukraine, no matter the exact mix of future coalition governments. Now, Zelensky has spoken with Canada's Prime Minister. So Canada, the Liberal Party there, 10 years of the Liberal Party, people have got kind of bored of them. Justin Trudeau has been... he's been the face of Canada, but he's not necessarily the brains of Canada. Someone like Chrystia Freeland, who is his finance minister, has just kind of stepped down. In all likelihood, you are going to see the Liberals lose the next election. And that will be a shame for Ukraine because the Liberals are much more in support of Ukraine than other parties. And you're going to get the Conservatives, I think, succeed there, which is their much more Trumpian approach to politics than the kind of Canada first rather than helping Ukraine. And that's a real problem, I think, for G7 unity of support for Ukraine, which is a real shame. You have got Mark Carney. People in the UK will know him as a former Bank of England, head of the Bank of England, is actually running, I think, is likely to be Trudeau's successor in charge of the Liberal Party there. But anyway, so Max24 saying, Zelensky said, I spoke with Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau ahead of Canada's G7 presidency. So Canada is going to take on the presidency of the G7. We discussed key priorities, including strengthening sanctions against Russia, particularly targeting their propaganda networks and shadow fleet. So I think this will be a good thing for Trudeau to be in charge of that. He will be, I think, hopefully will be strong on anti-Russian positioning. Okay. Moving on to the US, very short amount of time. Well, not too many things to say about the US today. However, I am going to go through part of this article because I think it is fascinating. So Julia Davis for the Daily Beast has written an article, say Kremlin insiders reveal how Trump is already secretly helping Putin. So Trump's musing about Greenland, Canada and Panama Canal startled America's allies and delighted foreign foes. In Russia, they are interpreted to mean that he isn't really opposed to foreign wars of conquest after all. I find this absolutely on point and quite... In fact, I mentioned this the other day. I said exactly this. What is the difference between the US's position on taking Greenland off Denmark, forcefully, and Russia invading Ukraine? I think there's very little functional difference. And what this is doing is giving Russia permission to invade Ukraine. And lo and behold, that's what the propagandists are exactly saying. So this isn't just me having a whinge about Trump. Right, this is literally what Russian propagandists are saying. Okay, so let's go and look at that because it's important to understand what they think. So, President-elect says, writes Julia Davis, President-elect Donald Trump's social media posts about annexing Greenland, Canada, and the Panama Canal startled America's allies and delighted foreign foes. In Russia, the statements were interpreted to mean that Trump isn't really opposed to fighting to foreign wars of conquest after all. To them, Trump's tirades revealed that, just like Russian President Vladimir Putin, Trump would be delighted to invade any country that couldn't fight back. He would, so Greenland and Denmark, Panama, Canada. Trump would be delighted to invade any country that couldn't fight back. He would expect accolades and a lavish victory parade after seizing foreign territories, just like the fallout from Russians stealing Crimea in 2014. Trump infamously described the annexation of Crimea as, and let's look at his own words here, right? So this isn't just me or Julia Davis whinging about Trump. Trump has said that the invasion of Crimea was a genius and a savvy move by Putin. Doesn't morally condemn it that much, but talks about how clever, how savvy and genius it was. Putin tried to repeat the trick and take the rest of Ukraine in 3 days in 2022, and the Kremlin insiders believe Trump only disapproves of the war because it turned out to be a lengthy and costly one. Russia's premier propagandists and experts already believe that Trump can be persuaded to go along with Moscow's wish list if Putin gets to influence him tete-a-tete personally. They are, like what happened in 2018 in Helsinki, where he got that one-to-one conversation with Putin. Only a single translator was there. No one else knows what happened in that meeting, and he came out and basically said everything that Putin wanted him to say. Putin completely controlled Trump's narrative at that point, to the point where the GOP back in America, the Republican Party, had to admonish him kind of subtly and then bring out rhetoric against what Trump had said, which was against his own intelligence services and in favor of Putin and Putin's narrative. Trump drank the Kool-Aid that day, and as I've said to you before many times, that's I think one of the worst international foreign policy cock-ups of Trump's. Well, it was the worst. It was the worst. That and the Kurds, that and hanging the Kurds out to dry in Syria, and terrible. Anyway, so Putin tried to repeat that trick when he took. They are vehemently opposed. So the propagandists are vehemently opposed to the idea, and this is super important here, of negotiating with retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, Trump's Ukraine envoy. So they don't want to negotiate with him because actually he knows his onions. And if they do it directly with Trump, then they can bypass what would be difficult negotiations. The dream scenario that they envision would include legitimizing Russia's invasion of Ukraine and recognizing Moscow's territorial demands. Incredible. So we're going to go on to the article much later. It says, host of one of the shows, the famous Vladimir Solovov, vehemently disagreed. He said, these are awesome statements. So there's statements about Canada, Panama, and Greenland, right? These are awesome statements. No, he's not joking. Of course he isn't joking. Do you think I'm kidding when I say that Finland, Warsaw, and the Baltics, Moldova, and Tallinn should come back home? So Solovov is saying, look, when I talk about on these propagandist shows every night that we should be taking the Baltics back, that Poland should come back home, I'm not joking. Trump ain't joking either. He wants Panama. He wants Greenland. He wants Canada. So do you think I'm joking? No. They should all rejoin the Russian Empire, followed by Alaska, by the way. Give it back, says Solovov. He added, the way he is rationalizing, Trump is rationalizing it, is tremendous. We should follow his example and quietly take everything back. So what Trump is saying is legitimizing Russia's imperialistic intentions. And if you don't believe me, they're literally freaking telling you. Like, this isn't me being anti-Trump. This is the Russians telling you what they're thinking and basing it on Trump's rationale. Echoing the statements of so we should follow his example and quietly take everything back. Echoing the statements of Deputy Chairman of the Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, Putin's top propagandist argued that Russia should now take more than the 4 Ukrainian regions it has already constitutionally decreed to be Russian. Luguyov stated, my friends, Trump's insane statements show that there should not be any ceasefire. Why would we need a ceasefire when we're confidently moving forward? So in other words, Trump's rhetoric is giving ammunition to an anti-ceasefire positioning from Russia. Solovov surmised, quote, I believe that what Trump is doing benefits us greatly. Trump is totally destroying any illusions that anyone might still have had about the summit of democracies, about respecting opinions of NATO allies. It's like he's saying, who are all of you? You're all nobodies. I will talk to Putin and Xi Jinping. He's a great guy, an awesome guy. This blows my mind. And the end of the article says, military expert Mikhail Kodarinok noted, quote, after the statement of President-elect Donald Trump about Canada, Greenland and Panama, in my opinion, we can now consider special military operations as the norm for resolving arguments between countries. The silence of European leaders clearly confirms this. I will take you back to NATO Article. I love it when the connections all become apparent. I will take you back to Articles 1 and 2 here, that NATO members should pursue peaceful and economic and other ways of doing conflict solution, rather than going to Article 4 and then Article 5. And what this military expert in Russia is saying, well, after what Donald Trump has said about Canada, Greenland and Panama, then actually the way we resolve arguments between countries isn't through peaceful negotiations, it's by military operations. And he says the silence of European leaders clearly confirms this. Now, the European leaders have been too afraid to call out Donald Trump to start a war between the EU and Trump when they are wanting Trump to be supportive of the EU in terms of Ukraine. Trump is just taking a bloody flamethrower to international alliances and politics here. And this is why I said he's clearly the worst option for global security going forwards. Now, some of you still think he's like the bee's knees for some reason, that this is the way to do international politics, is by threatening Panama and Mexico and Canada and Greenland and Denmark and China. Just go threatening them all, be kind of bullying approach to politics. You know, maybe that might end up working. But I don't know. I think it's looking exceedingly dangerous because it's giving permission for Russia to do all of those terrible things as well. You know, as American, you might say, I'm an America First guy. It's like America's first patriot. Or it's like, yeah, as long as it's beneficial for America, I don't really give a damn about the rest of the world. Whatever we do in Ukraine is solely about America's strength. And what we do, okay, but that starts getting, when you go down that route, if you go too far down that route, it looks like imperialism. Yeah, we just need to invade other countries because it'll be America first. It'll be benefit to America. I don't really care about... America's power in the world is more important than morality and more important than not doing genocide or than not invading a country. And it starts getting really, really dangerous. So you take that to the nth degree, that America First principle, and you end up looking rather like an imperialistic Russia. Political scientist Dmitry Kulikov added the era of nation states is over and that the world will return to the era of empires. He confidently said, the new world is dawning. Solovov agreed. This is the era of the strong. That's what we know. Trump wants to be, that strong man leader. I think it was Guy Verhofstadt, to people who are Brexiteers, UK Brexiteers, are not fans of Guy Verhofstadt because he's representative of the EU. But he wrote a book on, and I haven't read it, but I do want to read it, so let's go to Amazon. And he wrote a book on a new, I don't know what happened there. Wrote a book on new empires. I'm going to find that now more properly. So here we are. The book I was referring to, but actually he's done it more in his talks and whatnot, is Europe's Last Chance, Why European States Must Form a More Perfect Union. Obviously, this is going to look very pro-EU, and he's a super pro-EU guy, but he's talking about it in terms of global politics and in terms of empire. and he's actually done some speech. And I think that was what I was referring to, is actually a speech I watched him do previously. And indeed, The Spectator was a very right-wing newspaper, saying Guy Verhofstadt on the world's empires, where he talks about the EU, only an EU empire can secure liberty. And that we are in this new age of empires at the moment. Here, Citywire Selector has the EU Parliament member and Belgium's 47th Prime Minister Guy Verhofstadt said Europe's future lies in being competitive with the world's powerhouses. We are in a new age of empires. What the future really holds for Europe. And I think the general principle here is correct, is that stop thinking in terms of, being an individual country. Like if you're Belgium or if you're even the UK, like how do you compete on the world stage when you've got the US and their kind of hegemonic empire over there, and you've got BRICS, or you've got China, but actually BRICS is becoming this conglomerate with imperial objectives, and where is Europe's place in this battle between these huge empires? And then you start looking at Trump and what he's doing as a strongman emperor wannabe, looking at Panama, looking at Greenland, looking at Canada, looking at Mexico, and strongmanning relationships between those countries and kind of exhibiting bullying behavior there. And then you've got China over there with its Belt and Road Initiative spreading throughout the world. What is the EU doing to fight back against this? If you sit back and go, well, we're not an empire ourselves, we're not interested in global hegemony, then fair enough. But those other dudes out there, they don't think like that, and so you're just allowing them to mop up the world into their respective camps. And so he's saying, look, the EU, I presume, and I need to look into this in a far more detailed sense, but we need to understand the world in competing empires at the moment. And I wouldn't disagree. I mean, we're when we're looking at what's going on, we're in the war in Ukraine. It's this massive game of chess between competing sides, and those sides are gaining greater and greater clarity at the moment, with like literally picking sides rather than sitting on a fence. Or even if they are sitting on a fence, they're like, oh yeah, but actually we're buying an awful lot of Russian hydrocarbons, or we're doing a lot of we're working in a way that benefits BRICS. Say some of these OPEC global southern countries, Middle Eastern countries, you're like, okay, I think you really have picked your side, even though although Saudi Arabia's joined BRICS and UAE seems to be adjacent. And anyway, I just think that we're in a very volatile time at the moment. It does look like it's a new age of empires. So maybe this is an idea I need to look into and watch a bit more of Guy Verhofstadt. And I know some of you, as I say, will not be big fans of his. Actually, I always think everything he said was pretty spot on, because I was pro-EU myself. Anton Gerashenko, yesterday information appeared in Russian media that high-ranking Russian officials have visited the United States. So on December the 25th, a plane that belongs to Putin's administration arrived in the States, namely an aircraft from the Special Russia Flight Squad, and I think that's now returned. So there have been talks about how some deals might have been taking place between, one would probably presume, the incoming Trump administration, and that's a problem because Biden is still president, and the Russians. So according to Flight Radar, the plane flew to Washington and New York and then returned to Russia. Today, spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Affairs Ministry, Zakharova, commented that it was a rotation of Russian diplomats. So it could have been that. However, we have heard Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, say to TASS, quote, "We are certainly not satisfied with the proposals sounding on behalf of representatives of President-elect Trump's team to postpone Ukrainian membership in NATO for 20 years and to introduce a peacekeeping contingent of British and European forces into Ukraine. This can only be about credible, legally binding agreements." That's freaking hilarious, Lavrov, you numbnut. "That must address the root cause of the conflict and enshrine a mechanism to ensure that they cannot be violated." In other words, Russia wants a weak Ukraine controlled by Russia, and they don't appear to be up for capitulating to Trump's demands in terms of what he sees a peace looking like. Now, whether those statements are coming out of a trip to the US or not, I don't know. But it seems very coincidental. Now, Shashank Joshi says, and this is kind of I often lump in a bit of China with Ukraine conversation discussion because I think they are part of that axis that we have seen. In May 2023, Mr. Ramaswamy, so Vivek Ramaswamy, went so far as to publicly state, "I have no reason to think Elon won't jump like a circus monkey when Xi Jinping calls in the hour of need." In other words, that's a double negative. So I do think Elon Musk will jump like a circus monkey when Xi Jinping of China calls in the hour of need. And when I talked about this yesterday, I talked about this in my Musk video as well, that he is beholden to China, and we've got his own Doge, Department of Energy, Department of Government Efficiency, saying, Ramaswamy's together with Elon trying to make $2 trillion worth of savings, but he has said previously that Musk will do whatever China wants. And that's on record. Like, he said that. So there's an interesting difference of opinion there. And it seems certainly the case that there's a quid pro quo going on with Musk and China with regard to China allowing him to operate independently with Tesla inside China, and no other entity is able to do that. So what is it that Trump gives to China that allows him to do that? And Ramaswamy seems to know that, and I'm no fan of his. Okay, Zelensky's office has commented on Sabiha's visit to Syria. Presidential advisor Dmytro Litvin has said the visit initiated by Zelensky aims to boost contacts. President awaits Sabiha's report. So this is Jelani there, formerly head of HTS. I presume he's now basically de facto ruler of Syria. People have been somewhat worried about him, but he has had a change of direction. He was formerly of Al Qaeda, but has kind of, I think, tempered those extremes over the last few years. And people do have hopes that he can keep a pluralist society together. And we see the Ukrainian foreign minister here visiting Syria, giving food to the Syrians, helping out, sharing expertise on, in fact, do I have that next? No, I've got the food part here. So Sabiha in Damascus announced that Ukraine will send more food aid to Syria. "We promise food security support and are fulfilling it quickly. Tomorrow, over 20 trucks will deliver 500 tons of Ukrainian flour under the Grain from Ukraine program. We're ready to deliver much more," he stated. So Syria has been an important place for Russia to be stationed. They had access to the Tartus port, as well as all of these bases around Syria. What Ukraine will want to do is be giving Syria this grain, make sure they have food provision. And the quid pro quo there is that Syria will kick Russia firmly out of Syria, which will be to the benefit of Ukraine. As well, they're swapping expertise on how to do war crimes investigation, evidence collection and synthesis and analysis, and they're helping out within that domain as well. Anyway, that's enough from me. Hopefully that was of use. A bit of a sidestep into whether we are in a new age of empires, and I'll have a little bit of a look into that going forward. But I will leave you with a quote from this. We now live in what I call a new age of empires, where we have a competition between 4 or 5 big continental nations, organizations and civilizations, he said. Verhofstadt outlined the US, China, India, the UK, Russia and the EU as the main competitors in the world of tomorrow, but stressed the EU wouldn't be able to compete if it didn't address key tasks. Is Europe ready? Ready? No way, he said, while listing the main challenges as military development, technology, economy and politics. And this is where these conversations are incredibly important to what we've been talking about with regard to the war in Ukraine. It's how the EU needs to have a military arm in order to have, if it's going to be a political entity, you cannot just ignore how the military is a part of your political and economic strategizing. It has to be a part of that. And so therefore, Europe does need some kind of military arm. You know, if NATO aren't going to step up, then there needs to be some kind of European equivalent. So on military, Verhofstadt said security for nations can't be achieved outside of the 6 big entities. And this is being tested in real time by the war in Ukraine. He said the EU needs to increase military spending and create a European pillar within NATO to become a geopolitical player. He also questioned the EU's ability to act as a geopolitical force at a time when member states struggle to find a common position on issues such as the conflict in Gaza, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the UN General Assembly vote. And then he talks about technology and the economy, etc., and energy. But I think that is something that we do need to consider. This: how do we understand the world? How do we interpret everything that's going on in the world? Is this a new age of empires that we do live in? Anyway, take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.